Welcome to Podula Rasa. I'm David Blank.
And I'm Jim Esch.
This is a podcast about finding something in nothing.
Show number 10, Back to School. In this installment of Podula Rasa, we return to our quest, an exploration of the life and times of Thom Williams, who was an inspiration to so many of us. Thom taught English and creative writing at Marple Newtown Senior High School in suburban Philadelphia. He was very good at his job. In the words of Bob Dylan, while preachers preach of evil fates, teachers teach that knowledge waits can lead to $100 plates. Goodness hides behind its gates, but even the President of the United States sometimes must have to stand naked. Dylan's, I think, criticizing sort of normative teaching practice there, but Thom Williams was not that kind of teacher. He was not the kind of teacher who taught that knowledge weights can lead to $100 plates. His brand of teaching waited for nothing. It was front and center, in the moment, like the wink of an eye or a Zen clap of haiku wisdom. The goodness was out in the free and clear for anyone who could see it, who wanted to see it. Unconventional and spirited, wise and wild, Thom Williams was an unforgettable force to be reckoned with. And it wasn't only the students he influenced and inspired. He was revered and respected by his peers as well. Today, our special guest is Lorisa Friedman, a high school English teacher at Marple Newtown, a friend and colleague of Thom's. We'll learn about their work relationship, their friendship, the teaching and life lessons that she learned from Thom. What you're about to hear is a lot like a water cooler conversation, a behind-the-scenes look at the teaching life. If you're a teacher yourself, you're in for a treat. If you're a student or former student, you'll get a glimpse at the other side of the educational equation. You'll hear just how much the kids matter to us and what a difference a good teacher can make in the lives of so many. I think we can all agree that Thom had a certain mystique about him. Would you agree? Yeah. Could you share some of your first impressions of him?
Yeah. So when I first started at Marple, in the beginning of every school year, they have teacher in-service. And this was my very first one. I mean, I was new to the district, and I walked into the in-service this year was at Paxson, which is where I was teaching. And in the back corner of the room, I didn't know it at the time, was Thom. But of course, I didn't know who anybody was. And he was sitting there with his beard and his backpack and his vest. And on either side of him, I later learned, was Tom McHugh and Deb Bonder.
It's a small world. Deb Bonder taught me how to swim.
Get out of here. I could see that, but I did not know that.
Because her father was Lou Bonner was a legend at Marple. Yeah. He was like in the athletic department.
Yeah.
And then Debbie worked as a swim instructor over the summer, and she was one of my swimming teachers.
Oh, wow. They all retired the same year. So Deb Bonder, Thom McHugh, Thom Williams, and Barb McHale all retired in 2009.
How would you just sort of describe the impression that Thom made on you? Like, what was the vibe that you got in some of those early
I was completely just... I remember when I read his eulogy, I explained that I just thought he was this vision. I didn't know how else to explain him. It was a vision. That's what he was, just this vision. And then when I started teaching at the high school and I met him, I realized that was the same man from the in-service, and I realized that Deb was the same woman and Tom McHugh was the same man. You know, people you had seen before but really have no reason to be in touch with.
You also said you had the opportunity to observe him in the classroom. What did you see when you sat in on his classes?
He was not one to move around a lot. He kind of remained where he was. And it was fine because the kids were riveted. But he would walk around, for example, if he were teaching them how to play chess, Or if he were showing a film, so if he were showing Hamlet, he would be we had TVs on a cart. I'm really dating myself. We had TVs on a cart with a VCR player, and there were no remotes or anything. So you literally would have to be at the machine if you wanted to press pause. And he would be at the machine pressing pause and explaining what was going on and the language and what words were being spoken. And so I remember his doing that, and he used to write plays, and he would have his classes act out the plays. And there was one play, I don't know because we used to have the one-act play festival, and which was run by Tom McHugh. And sometimes Thom Williams would write a play for that, and it would be performed, and he was having his kids read it out loud, and there was one character's part, and all that character would say is, "Go to hell." Those were the 3 words that this character said, and the boy he assigned it to had a very deep voice. And so every 6 or 7 lines, all you would hear is, "Go to hell." And it was, and I'm not doing it justice, but if you were in the room hearing it, it was just brilliantly funny.
Yeah.
Brilliantly funny, because he had such a good understanding. He's the one who taught me that when you see the word pause, when you're reading a play, right, or if you're teaching a play, he was very mindful of the pause. And he explained how playwrights like Samuel Beckett, really, if they're putting it in there, if any playwright's putting it in there, you have to pause. And of course, you do. It makes complete sense. But he was the one who pointed that out to me. We were reading Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and I was telling him that we were reading that, and he said, "Oh, bring the kids over. We're all going to read it together." So I brought my class into his class. I mean, it's difficult to do these things now, but back then you could do it, and it was phenomenal to have his perspective on things, right? Plus a chance for my kids to meet him, because unless they had creative writing or poetry, they would not have had him if I had them for English. It was just something very special about that. And we did that for Waiting for Godot, because I remember saying to him, "I'm having some trouble with this text." And he said, "Oh, come on over. We're all going to read it together." So we all went over, and we all read it together. And that's a freaky play.
Yeah, I'm actually teaching that in the fall. I think you either have to watch that play or read it aloud to really get what's going on with it.
I saw that play. I went to see that play, and I had to walk out. I was so disturbed by it. Really? Yeah. Yes, I was really disturbed. Not because I didn't think it was good. It was something about it. It was just very disturbing to me.
The reason I thought of teaching it was because I think it really speaks to the COVID-19 times where we're all kind of waiting for the end. When's this going to end?
Yeah, right.
So I'm just looking for ways for them to be able to tap in.
Well, hopefully it'll be a little better than Godot, who never shows up. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm feeling a lot like Gogo and Dee Dee. One thing you said was the students were riveted by him. What was it about him that kept them on the edge of their seats?
Well, first of all, he had a very calming presence. And he was a big guy, right? So physically, he certainly commanded a room. That's number one. But his mannerisms were very gentle. And the way he spoke was gentle. He knew where everyone's goodness was. And that, I think, is really important in life in general, and in particular when you're teaching.
Right.
Because when you're teaching, you're dealing with personalities that just run the gamut. And so he had such a great sense of humor. And so I think that combined with when he said something, it made such sense. So that video that's on YouTube about all those rules to live by, they make sense, right? And he used to have his kids do that. He would have them, after Polonius gives his speech to Laertes about neither a borrower nor a lender be, all those pieces of advice, he would have the kids generate 3 of their own rules to live by. And he would hang them up on the walls. That started, I guess, in the 90s or the early 2000s, where kids would write on the walls. And it was covered with lines of poetry and different pieces of advice. It was brilliant.
That's great.
Yeah. So I think that's what did it. And he understood what was important. And that's also a really big deal, the ability to put aside the prescribed curriculum and be able to switch gears and adapt and say, here's a situation, here's what we see in Hamlet. Hamlet's girlfriend lies to him. When did your girlfriend lie to you? Or when did you get into a fight with a friend? And it's not so much it was a tell-all, share-all thing.
Right.
But just to plant that idea.
Right.
To normalize things for everyone is big.
I also never remember him losing his temper or...
Exactly. Right.
He just always seemed to be kind of calm.
Oh, he was always calm. I remember coming into school one day and telling, I'm divorced, and at the time I was married, and I told him one thing, and he looked me square in the eye, and he said to me, you need to get out of that marriage now.
Wow.
Wow. Wow is right. And no
and
one...
you had never talked about this stuff before with him.
Well, I had, but
okay.
People were always of the mindset of, well, you could go to counseling, you could work this out, etc., and I'm bringing this up not to talk about me, but to talk about him, that he is the only one in my life who said that to me. He said, you need to get out of this marriage now. Okay. And that was revelatory to me, to be given that permission.
Did you get any pieces of advice for him that you recall, or?
So he would constantly quote, right? He quoted Sophocles and he quoted Shakespeare. He quoted all the time, and he would listen to things. I think he started me on a very great appreciation of song lyrics and certain words, right, that you would find in a text.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one fire drill. I mean, now our fire drills, of course, they're much more organized, which they should be because they're fire drills. But back in the day, the school districts in general were not as organized with these things. And it was really cold outside. And he went into his car and put the engine on. And he called out to me. He goes, Friedman, what are you doing outside? Come in the car. So I went into the car, and he was playing some Bob Dylan. I don't remember the song, but I was listening to it. And the words, and I looked at him, I said, my God, come on. He said, yeah, I know, because they were just so brilliant. It was something that he brought to the table and was so willing and eager to share with everyone. And what's interesting is I remember when his mother died, I asked him if all of this knowledge that he had accrued through the years helped him. All of this knowledge about philosophy and theology and all that stuff, if it helped him deal with the death of his mom. And he paused. And he said, that is the greatest question I've ever been asked. And he repeated this question to his classes. I'm not sure if I ever got an answer. I felt like I had really accomplished something because here I had asked a question that made him think. And we were so used to his thinking for everyone. But I genuinely wanted to know, how do you deal with things?
Do you have an opinion on that, like how he would have answered it, or how would you answer that question yourself?
I would have to say, yes, that he would have pulled, just like I pulled when I went through my separation, I pulled from the great works and things that he taught me, patience, tolerance, kindness, right? He used to say that all the time. I think he would have had to have pulled from that. But I don't know. He never answered it for me. He just kept repeating the question.
And then you said he asked his students.
Right, he would say, Miss Friedman keeps asking me this, and I'm trying to figure out the answer. I really wanted to know. But not everything about him was so serious. I mean, he used to have these blab-off competitions, and he used to have stupid joke day, where the kids would have to come in, and this was before the internet, and the kids would have to come in and they'd have to tell 3 stupid jokes. And so the kids would be going around the building asking teachers if they knew any jokes because this was the assignment for the day. And I used to give them jokes to ask, and one I was told that this girl went to the front of the room and she told a joke, and he said to her, "Did Miss Friedman give you that joke?" Because it was just I guess it was a joke that we had told between the two of us through the years. And so yes, they got a kick out of that. And he could dance. A lot of people didn't know that. He was not only graceful in his mind, but in his body.
I remember watching him play guitar. You know, I told you before that we jammed with him once or twice. He kind of danced with the guitar in a way. You know, just the way he moved his body when he played. I can see how he would be a good dancer. He put his whole body into that instrument.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the last time we spoke about a wiffle ball game. What was that story?
So he called me once. I was teaching. I guess we had gotten phones by then. And he said, "What are you doing? Come out." Was he playing in his classroom or outside? I just can't remember. He said, "But come on, we're going to play wiffle ball." And I said, "I can't right now. I'm teaching." And he said, "So am I." And so lo and behold, a few years go by, and I had taken my juniors outside after the AP exam for a wiffle ball game, and I got clearance from the gym department, and we played the whole period. And you're never quite sure how that's going to go, right? I mean, the kids are just in charge. I literally would bring my chair outside and monitor, but they were in charge of creating teams, etc. And some classes got really into it, and they had so much fun with it, and they had umps and first base coaches. It was really, some of them just got very creative with it. And then we had to write our personal statements for college, where you have to write about a time that you came to some kind of realization about yourself. And I'll never forget this kid, Matthew, who I thought was going to write about something else, turned in this essay about the wiffle ball game. And he explained how he wasn't even going to take this AP class, even though he knew he was a good writer, because he wasn't sure he was going to fit in with the kids. He was much more, he thought, involved with athletics and going out on weekends than he anticipated any of his classmates being, and he tended to shy away from them. But at the wiffle ball game, which didn't happen until June, at the wiffle ball game, which he said was such a fun experience for him, he realized that we are all in this together, that we are all trying to get through high school together, and we should support each other. And while we might not all have the same interests, we all have to help each other. We're all human. And that realization came from a wiffle ball game. I mean, I had taught this kid since September, and he had written essays, and was very smart. So I was reminded of when Thom said to me about, when I said to him, but I'm teaching, I can't play wiffle ball. He said, well, so am I.
Right.
You see, this is what I'm talking about.
He had this ability to appeal to students of all stripes.
Right.
So jocks loved him, musicians, artsy people, like the geeks, like he was the head of the chess club, like all those guys, was mostly guys. Everyone just seemed to gravitate towards him, and he could cross all those boundaries. And it was a very big tent. You felt when you went into his classroom that everyone was included. He could appeal to all varieties.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know,
no, and it's not something that can really be defined either. You're not going to find it in a textbook.
No.
You're not going to find it in a class on education.
How has this rubbed off on your own teaching? I really like to kind of have you share. I mean, you've been at this for quite a while. I'm sure you're really good at it.
He and I are very different teachers, and I think my teaching style comes from a combination of him and my high school English teacher. My 12th grade English teacher, who I'm still in touch with, she was really the one after I had her class, my thought was, wow, if I could do for people what this woman is doing for me, how amazing would that be? And I think what the two of them had in common is they both showed me how much I love to learn, how much I love being a student. To be able to inspire that in another person, there's nothing quite like it.
Right.
To be able to get someone to trust you with their mind, with their heart, is no small feat.
So how does this translate into your teaching style?
I really think that kids will do whatever you require them to do, right? So if you require X, they will give you X. But if you require X, Y, and Z, they will deliver X, Y, and Z. And they want to deliver X, Y, and Z. And I know sometimes that kids get a very bad rap, that they're lazy or they don't care. And I don't think that's true. I think that most kids care. And I don't think most kids are inherently lazy. I think they need to be given an opportunity to do things. And so just as I used to sit in on Thom's class, right, and I would avail the kids of his experience, I often in my classes bring in other adults from the building to talk to them. So I try to avail my students of other people, just like Thom availed my students of him.
Did you notice the impact that Thom had on other students?
I think they always felt respected by him. And I say this because not everybody is good in English, right? Mm-hmm. Just like not everybody is good in math. It shouldn't matter, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why I think they respected him, because they knew that he respected them. Thom thought it was okay for kids to copy notes sometimes. And he's correct. There's something really almost zen, if you will, about copying notes.
Yeah.
Not talking to kids when they're copying notes, but just to copy notes.
It's funny you bring that up because I write a Substack newsletter. I'm going to plug myself here. But in this piece where I talked a little bit about Thom and I talked about the show that Dave and I did, I was remembering some other influential teachers I had, and for like really odd reasons. One of them was a junior high school teacher. I think his name was Mr. Wolf, and he taught history. The whole class was just him writing on the board.
Oh, wow.
He was clearly just a day ahead of us, kind of. But what impressed me was how neat his script was.
Oh.
And I imitated it. I was like, these are beautiful letter shapes. I just was like loving
Yes.
the language.
Oh, my gosh. The handwriting. I have to interrupt you. There was a book that came out about Samuel Beckett, maybe? I don't know. And I figured, you know what? I'll give it a try. Now, I couldn't finish it. Thom was not alive, so I had no one to help me with it. But they had samples of Beckett's work in his hand. Lo and behold, the handwriting was almost identical to Thom Williams's. Remember his printing / script? So similar, to the point that I called Thom's wife and I said, you have got to see this, and I sent her a picture of it. So yes, his physical script that made me think of it. And the other thing that made me think of when you said that was when he wrote, I don't know if he wrote a full poem by Basho or an excerpt on the board your first day of class.
Haiku. It was a haiku. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember, so that's how I studied haiku under Thom, right? I would sit in on his class because I knew nothing about haiku. And we went to a workshop together. I went, he went, I think a few kids from his poetry class went. This was in Delaware on a Saturday. And I still have my notebook from that day. It was so, so interesting. And he was teaching the class, I go, you stay, 2 autumns. And then there was another one about the monkey's face still being the monkey's face, like 1 year later or something. And there was another one about Kyoto. And I just remember being blown away at how moved I was by these short poems. And they didn't have to be 575, as he explained. So in these 3 lines, it seemed like your whole life was explained. That's what he was able to impart. And so you could do that, or he could talk to you about Mending Wall by Robert Frost, about the good fences and the good neighbors and the apple orchards. And wow, okay, here's my life again, explained in a poem. Obviously, I had studied poetry, but I had never studied poetry until I met Thom Williams.
I remember in that writing class I took with him, he taught us haiku, and then I just started. It was like opening the spigot.
Yeah.
And just filled my notebook with all these things. And then I would share them with him, and he would mark the ones that he thought were good.
Right. Yes.
But the fact that I felt like I could trust him, that he wasn't going to throw shade and make me feel like crap. Because when you're creative, vulnerability is a big issue with so many kids. They don't want to share, especially with their peers.
Right.
But often with their teachers too. They're sort of afraid of being wrong, or they fear of being exposed, or whatever. Never felt that with him. I felt like I could take all kinds of chances. A lot of these poems were just ridiculous, absurd things that come out of the brain of a 17-year-old.
Right.
But I always felt accepted. He didn't like everything I wrote, and I respected that. Like, he wasn't going to say, it's all good, but he would point out the bright spots.
Yeah.
And I never felt like he was going to cut me down for the poems that didn't work as well.
Right. And I remember he used to give the kids, I don't know if he did this for you, so he had a list of all these things that dealt with the 4 seasons. I still have this paper, by the way, and I used it in my poetry class. I don't have poetry this year, but I used it in my poetry class. And so somewhere in your haiku, you had to include one of these references to a season.
Right.
So whether it was the scarecrow or spring moon or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember writing a poem using the spring somehow and the CVS annual toothbrush sale. And he thought that that was just so brilliant. And once again, I felt my life just open up. And I was not 17. I was an adult. He knew that kids were smart. And he let them see that they were smart, and that's something I try to do in my room.
That's great.
Right, and so when you ask what do I bring to my classroom that I got from him, and don't forget, he was not my teacher. I didn't go to Marple.
Right.
Is let's see what you're going to bring to the table, because I know you have a lot you can bring. And that's really big.
All this stuff you've been saying, it just makes me think about how much has rubbed off in my own teaching practice. I think I picked up more from him maybe than I even realized before I sat down to talk to you.
Well, that's the thing. It's so interesting you say that, right? Because when I listened to your podcast, that's how I felt. I could hear him. I think I told you, one of you, either you or Dave, does his inflections so well. And I was brought back to so many different things about him just listening to your brief podcast, the last one, number 6,
mm-hmm.
that I listened to it again and took notes, because I'm a big taker of notes. And I was writing down things that I wanted to share, even if they never made the cut. So he was very big into astrology. I don't know if he was when he was with you.
Yeah, I think he was.
Right. And so he was very into that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And very into the moon phases and all this.
Yep.
All that stuff. And so, people flocked to him because they wanted to know what the hell was going to happen in their lives. So he once said to me, he said, you're one of those people who pulls in people from different facets of life, and you're able to be friends with them. And I remember in your podcast, what was it you said that made me think about my grandmother? I'm so happy to have known someone like you. And, you were talking about how Thom said if he found someone who was loyal. And when I look back on that, at the time I wasn't quite sure I knew what he was talking about, but not that it went in one ear and out the other, but I wasn't quite sure. But then I remembered, so our principal used to be a man named John Sandville, and we still do, a faculty photo every year. And this one, on this particular year, I guess it was 2007 maybe, was from above. The photographer was above the faculty, and we all had to look up for the picture. And in the photo it's in the shape of a triangle, because I cut it out and put it on my computer, was Thom Williams, John Sandville, and one of our maintenance workers who's no longer there. His name was Terry Corson. And he was just the loveliest man, Mr. Corson. I live near St. Joe's, and he used to take a bus sometimes from his house to St. Joe's and then another bus to Marple. So sometimes I would give him a ride to St. Joe's, because right near my house. And we would talk a lot. And I remember cutting out the triangle that their heads formed in this picture. And I had it on my computer for years. And then they got rid of our computers one summer, and so they threw away the picture. But I remember thinking, this is the triumvirate right here. And it made me think about what Thom said, the ability to pull from all facets of life to help make your life complete. And I use the word pull. I'm pretty sure that he died on a Saturday or a Saturday night. And I can tell you where I was, because I knew that he had died. I hadn't been told yet, but I knew. I was in the King of Prussia Mall. I was with my son, and he was 5 or 6 years old at the time, and we were in the Lego store. And as soon as we got to the Lego store, I felt this pull literally a pull in my body, and I knew. And my son and I were meeting my parents for dinner that night, and I called Bryn Mawr Rehab. That's where he was at the time. And I asked for his room, and the phone was picked up, and then it sounded like it fell. And so I called the front desk at Bryn Mawr Rehab, and I said, I want to report this. I don't know if the patient lost or what happened. And they said, you should really speak to the family. And then the next morning, a colleague of mine called me to tell me. And then I did speak to Meg that day. So he had died somewhere, in those 2 days before I officially found out.
But when you felt that pull in the Lego store, you just attached it to him.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I knew it. I mean, it was that pull. And I think I told you before, I felt this incredible responsibility to be able to tell people about him. And I think a lot of people feel that way about him because he seemed to take on the responsibility of taking care of all of us. I don't even know if he wanted to do that, but that's what he was doing. He was really this larger-than-life figure. I mean, I know that sounds like such a cliche.
And here's another thing I'll ask it. I never got the sense that he was conceited.
No.
Like some
Confident.
people who have a very forceful personality or they have an air about them, sometimes they're, a big ego goes along with that. And I think Thom had an ego, too. But he didn't come off in this kind of smarmy sort of like, I'm better than you, you should look up to me. I never got that feeling from him.
No, never. Never. And to be able to have that type of presence but not be arrogant it's something. And, he could totally laugh about himself because he used to wear this dark blue vest. And, he had this beard, right? And so sometimes I'd come in and I'm like, dude, you're shedding everywhere. Like he'd have dust all over his navy blue vest, either from his beard or his hair or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was funny. And he had a really good sense of humor, even about his lunches, which were the craziest ass things I had ever seen. We used to have very interesting conversations about food. Yeah. Right, so that's what I'm saying. You could really, it's not like everything was so deep and philosophical.
No.
I mean, there were plenty of just funny moments. Everyone wanted him to like them, but not everybody understood him, even though he understood everyone.
Yeah.
And it was difficult. It was a difficult place to be if you didn't have a sense of him.
What do you mean?
Because some people just did not know what to do with him. Kids could totally relate to him. Not even a problem. But not all adults could.
Yeah.
So, but there's nothing to be done about that.
I mean, to do what he did as a high school teacher, it kind of amazes me. Or to sort of get away with the things that he got away with, to put it that way. How did he do that?
He wasn't trying to be out there. I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
Sometimes people try too hard. You know what I mean?
Right.
He wasn't trying at all. This was his thing.
That's who he was.
That's who he was.
Himself.
So it wasn't even an option for him.
Right.
Although what's interesting is, now that you mention this, he and John Sandville both told me, it's funny because when John Sandville retired, and I cried, he didn't retire. he went on to become an assistant superintendent. He's now a superintendent, but he went on to become an assistant superintendent in a different district.
Okay.
And I said to him, I said, I can't believe you're leaving. I said, who's going to understand me like you do? And he said, no one. And Thom Williams said to me, he said, Lorisa, you cannot always be yourself. Again, like that whole idea, you need to get out of your marriage now. Now. You cannot always be yourself. He was right. And so for someone to be so honest about that, and that's another thing I try to impart to my students. What we are in here, you might not be able to be that all the time. And I know that we're supposed to say be yourself all the time, but
well, there's a time and a place for it.
There's a time and a place.
Yeah.
And he point blank said to me, not everyone's going to get you. You're going to need to curtail yourself a little. Wow, I wish someone had told me that when I was younger. So I think it was important, different things he used to repeat to me all the time, so I'm assuming he repeated them to other people.
Okay.
He used to always say, and I know I'm misquoting, all things will seek their rightful level, which has gotten me through many a day.
Mm-hmm.
You know the whole rules to live by?
Yes.
The two top ones, he always said, survive. Number one, survive. And number two, don't ever be surprised. And I remember when I spoke at the funeral service, that was my first line. I said he gave me two rules to live by, survive and don't ever be surprised. And I cannot help but point out the irony in the fact that we are all completely surprised that Thom did not survive. It was, this trick of the universe or something. I don't know. And he also used to tell me, act as if ye had faith, right from the Bible.
It seems like he was informed by religion.
Oh, he knew it. Right. Because he was well versed in these things, which was helpful.
And one of those rules to live by in the video that I rewatched, I think he says, anything can happen.
Anything
at any time can happen. And you have to be ready. And
right.
that has really stuck with me the last couple of months.
Yeah, right. Because I used to say to him, well, it can't get worse. And he'd say, oh, no, it could get worse, in that voice he had. Right. And he wasn't saying it out of pessimism or cynicism. It's true. Thom was one of those people who could bring you from your lowest point of despair, right? He could elevate you to a level where you could envision yourself conquering your fears. And he would put his hand on your shoulder, and he was a big physical presence, right? But he would put his hand on your shoulder, and you would feel the weight of that hand. And it just made you feel as if, okay, things are going to be taken care of.
Thank you to Lorisa Friedman for sharing your insights and memories of Thom with us. Thinking about who Thom was, we bring him into the present with us. Teachers, students, we're all just people. Thom Williams was someone who effortlessly danced between the professional and personal boundaries that we, perhaps, set for ourselves. We all bring different things to the lives of those we touch. Thom had that ability to bring so much to so many, and we all miss him. Thom truly knew and celebrated, as Lori said, where everyone's goodness was. We will continue our exploration of Thom Williams and his impact on those who knew him. Please keep reaching out to us. Perhaps you didn't know Thom, but listened to this and something resonated with you. Please reach out and share that with us. The music was random selections from Jim and my archives, as well as the better music of Thom himself, along with Jimmy Devlin and others from the Obsidian CD. Specific tracks were Mercury Run and Red Red Sun. We again invite anyone who is moved to donate to Thom's memory by contributing to the Thom Williams Memorial Scholarship Fund. The address is listed in the notes for shows 6 and 8. No amount is too small. Perhaps you felt like you could have said more to him at some point. Here's a way to do that and bring his memory forward for others. Thank you for listening.